Welcome. Erica. We're so excited that you're here. We're really excited for today's Trauma Training Tuesday. Um, we'll give it a couple minutes as people come in. But again, we are delighted to see people. Ooh, look at that. I'm spotlighting you, Marcelle.
No, I'm spotlighted or spotlit.
You
I don't know what
amazing.
the spot is. It spotlit, spotlighted. I don't know.
I don't know either. I didn't even question that I might have it wrong until, but
You didn't. It's just in my mind. Is it spotlit? Is it spotlighted? I don't know.
that's beautiful. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. If I think many of you have been to Trauma Training Tuesday before, and it's so great to see you. It's always great to see all the friendly, familiar faces. But if you haven't
This
been
meeting
before,
is being recorded.
I just
sorry.
went through and muted folks that weren't already muted.
Thanks.
So if you're having any trouble unmuting, just send me a chat. The intention isn't to silence folks, but really to just make that echo stop there.
Yeah, that was
So yeah, if you have any challenges, just send me a chat. I'll get you fixed up.
I have said it before, production values are not our greatest strength here at Trauma Training Tuesday, but our greatest strength is having incredible presenters who are so knowledgeable about trauma. I am so excited to be able to share the wisdom of my amazing friend, Dr. Marcelle Crinean.
Yeah,
I want to get it right. I practiced and then,
you
but
did good.
I watched her do a presentation for another group and she only had 30 minutes and I was astounded at how much her understanding of kind of what's going on in trauma and how it impacts the brain and what to do about it was so it was transformational. Your work is incredible. I'm so excited that everyone's here today to kind of hear from you. Um, and I will just pass it right on over to you.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much, Amy. Um, so as so I'll do a quick intro and then just kind of set the scene a little bit. I've done myself a talk track only because, as Amy knows, as she said, we are friends now. I can talk about this stuff for way more than 2 hours. And I want to make sure that I stay on point and I don't get distracted because I will do that too. So if you see me looking down, it's mainly just because I'm making sure I stay on track. I also would love interruptions and questions all the way through, as much as you like, if you have any questions at all, right? Don't sit on any questions that you have until the end. I'll try and save some time for the end anyway, if you've got any questions as we go through things. That's my goal, is to save some at least 20 minutes at the end for questions. But if we have questions throughout, that's also great. I would love that. So I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself, because I do that all day, every day. So it would be great to have some real people to talk to. As Amy said, I'm Marcelle Crinean. So I am a clinical psychotherapist based in the UK, and I specialize in really anxiety and stress. They're the two main, and sleep, anxiety, stress, and sleep. They're the kind of the three main areas that I work in. And more these days, I work with NPEs. So for those of you that aren't aware of what NPEs are, NPE stands for non-parental event. And that is people who, like me, had a DNA surprise and found out that their father was not their biological father. And with that comes a whole pile of trauma and a whole pile of complex emotions. So because I discovered that I was myself an NPE a few years ago, I've kind of really diverted my practice, and now I deal a lot with NPEs, but at the core, I deal with anxiety, stress, and sleep. I'm also a high performance coach, so I work a lot with corporate people who might be struggling to navigate the mental challenges of high stress environments. I do that work too. But the one thing that Amy wanted me to spotlight is kind of my perspective on things, I guess, because as well as being a psychotherapist, my doctorate is actually in what's called psycholinguistics. So the combination of psychology with language. And my doctorate was on how the brain processes language, and then how the language that we use inside our heads, so you could call that thoughts, how that language affects our quality of life. And I did that sort of back in the 90s at university. So I've been studying this stuff for a really, really long time. So my perspective is very much, yes, it's from a psychology perspective, but it's also from a language perspective, and the language that we use inside our minds and how that can create some of the symptoms that we get when our body goes into shock and trauma. So you'll see smatterings of that as I go through my presentation today. So highlighting what I'm going to cover before I switch to my slides. So this is really probably geared at people who've experienced trauma themselves, but it might also work if you're supporting someone who has trauma, or you're just simply curious about another therapist's perspective on stuff and want to see what I've got to say, right? So the session will cover essentially how our brains create and store trauma and why they do that, because from a logical perspective, that would be the dumbest thing in the world to do. So how and why our brain creates and stores trauma, how we get stuck in kind of mental loops, if you like, so this kind of trauma narrative that we create, and the loops like the if only thinking or the what if thinking. And more specifically, we'll be looking at a what if type of thinking that I call sliding doors thinking, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But that's the idea that if only things had gone differently, or if only something hadn't happened, or if only I'd done it that way instead of that way, that my life would be so much better. So that's the kind of thinking that we're going to be looking at. Then I'm going to talk about why it's important we get out of those thinking patterns. And then finally, how we get out of those thinking patterns. So that is what I'm going to cover today. If you think that sounds like a great presentation, then stick with me. If you think you're in the wrong place, feel free to drop off straight away, because you'll be highly bored if you don't like anything I've just said. And I am going to share my PowerPoint, hopefully, and we will get started. So I can see my slides. Can you see my slides all right? Perfect, thanks, Kelsey. Okay, so as I say, this is really all about unpacking trauma narratives, why your brain keeps you stuck, and how to start. I'm just going to move a window out of the way, because much as I love to see your lovely faces, you're hiding my words. There we go. And how to start sort of moving forward. So if I start here, if you are on this call today as part of the Trauma Tuesday group, then you already know that trauma changes how we see ourselves, trauma changes how we see the world, trauma changes our place in that world, right? It just changes everything for us. And one of the most common symptoms, I'm going to call it symptom, but it's one of the things that happens from anyone who has had trauma, and I kind of, let's face it, that's most of us, right? We've all experienced, or many of us have experienced trauma to one extent or another. One of the most common symptoms is this keeping going over and over what we could have done differently, right? Or if only things had happened differently, or if the thing hadn't happened at all, right? That would suddenly make my life so much better now, right? And that's what I'm calling this what if thinking, right? If only, or I wish that, or that kind of thing, right? And I do want to be clear at this point, if there's anyone on this call who's thinking, well, I have a lot of what if thinkings, a lot of what if thoughts, but they're not like my life would be better. They're like worst case scenarios, right? Like, what if I lose my job? What if I'm never happy? What if I never have any money? What if I miss my flight because there's an accident on the motorway and I don't get through the traffic, right? That is a type of what if thinking. That's the default what if thinking that our brain creates when we're stressed. But that is not the type of what if thinking I'm going to be talking about today. Today, we're talking about the if only this thing had happened differently or not at all, then everything would be better. Almost that kind of rose-tinted glasses type what if thinking. And that is the type of thinking that often comes with trauma. So that's why I'm focusing on it today. So the problem with this kind of what if thinking is it doesn't just create stress, it creates real emotional pain, because what it's doing is it's comparing your current life, your real life, to a fantasy version that never happened. And unfortunately, reality always loses out when we have this type of thinking. So, and we're going to talk way more about this in the talk. So I've got some examples here that were kind of, they're there from my world, but you can probably insert your own what if in there, right? So a lot of the what if thoughts that I come across working with the not parents expected community is things like, if only I'd known earlier, if only I'd been told this secret earlier, if I'd, you know, if it hadn't been kept so late from me, then I'd be happier. My life would be amazing now, whatever it might be, right? What if I'd never taken the DNA test? What if I'd never done the thing? What if I'd done the thing differently, right? That kind of thing. Then, you know, this crappy thing that happened would never have happened and my life would be so much better. Okay. Or, you know, I wish I'd found this out before this person died. I'd, you know, then this amazing relationship would have happened instead, right? So if you feel comfortable, actually, I'm just going to get Kelsey, hopefully Kelsey, to check it. If you feel comfortable and you have ever caught yourself in any of these kind of thoughts, can you just pop a yes in the chat? I would love to know if anybody has ever had these kind of thoughts or if it's just me.
I'm seeing the yeses come through in the chat already. Yep.
Super. Okay, right, good. Okay, so what we're going to do then, that's good. So if you've had them, you know what I'm talking about. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at this type of thinking, how it's caused, why it's caused, and what we can do about it. Sound good? Hopefully that sounds good. And I will move on. So
I have a lot of people that are just recently joining. It seemed like people were having trouble with the link. So there's even more people that are here, and I'm so thrilled about that. And I think that it's a fine place right now to add them in. Just wanted to let you know that.
Excellent. As I say, just honestly, so yes, so for anybody that's just joined, I'm Marcelle Crinean. I'm talking about this stuff that's on the screen right now. And feel free, if you have any questions at all throughout the whole presentation, to just interrupt me and ask your question. Don't feel like you have to sit on it and wait till the end, because if you're anything like me, you've forgotten it by the time you get there, or you know, or actually then it becomes the only thing that you think about for the whole 2-hour presentation and you've forgotten to listen to all the rest. So feel free to interrupt if you want to. That's absolutely fine. So I also just want to talk about my definition of trauma, okay? Because it can mean different things to different people. So I'm just going to really quickly define what trauma is. I'm just looking at the time to make sure I'm already not off time. So what trauma is to me, okay, and I'm not talking about defining trauma as the event itself, but as what happens inside you in response to a traumatic event, okay, or a traumatic experience. We could think of, or for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to define trauma as anything that overwhelms your system's ability to cope. Okay, that's how I'm going to define trauma. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah, with that definition? Maybe just type a 1 in the box if you're happy with the definition of, oh, thumbs up, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so we can think of trauma as anything that overwhelms your system's ability to cope. And actually, it doesn't have to be dramatic, right? It just has to be either too much, too fast, or too soon without enough support. And I'm going to talk in a minute about what I mean by that. But whenever that happens, whenever something happens that overwhelms our system's ability to cope, our brain struggles to process that experience in a way that's helpful. Okay, so it's almost like the filing cabinet there, right? It's like the brain's filing system has somehow got jammed and it doesn't know where to file this thing that's happened or how to file this thing that's happened. So in terms of trauma, we're going to see as we go through the presentation, trauma isn't actually about the event itself. Trauma is about how your brain stores the event. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that right now. Because trauma is stored in the area of our brain called the emotional brain. So that is where I am going now to talk about the brain. So as they would say on the L'Oreal adverts in the UK, I don't know if they're in the US too, but in the UK, they would go, oh no, actually they'd say, here's the science part, right? So we've got a little science part on the brain. So this is a picture of the brain. And these areas that I've annotated on here, I'm going to refer to these as areas of what are called the primitive emotional brain. Sometimes referred to as the lizard brain, sometimes referred to as the fear center of the brain, but essentially it's an area of the brain that is primitive, old as, right? It's the part of our brain that we share with other animals. It's where emotion lives. It's not where logic lives. So logic and rational thinking lives in this prefrontal cortex part of our brain, the intellectual brain, which is the conscious, rational thinking brain. Okay, in the intellectual brain, the conscious brain lives rational thoughts, intellectual thoughts, the ability to make good decisions, the ability to find good solutions to problems, that kind of stuff, right? Exactly as my brain stopped doing right then, right? That's what my conscious brain does. But these areas of the brain that I've annotated on here, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, they are the oldest parts, the most primitive parts of the primitive brain. And they work together because they live in the primitive brain. The primitive brain is all about survival, right? Doesn't actually care about your quality of life, only cares about whether you are alive or not. So it's a binary brain, right? You can't be a little bit alive or a little bit dead. If you're not dead, you're alive and it's done its job, right? Doesn't care what the quality of that life is after that. Its only job is to keep you alive. So these three parts of the brain, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus in the primitive emotional brain, their prime job is to recognize threats to your survival and deal with them swiftly so that you don't die. That's essentially their job, right? And so trauma, since we're talking about trauma, kind of starts with our brain, the amygdala in this instance. So the amygdala acts like the security guard in your brain. It's 24/7 scanning for anything that might be a threat to your survival. Now, it doesn't actually know what a threat to your survival is because it's primitive and doesn't have any knowledge of that. So it works very closely with the hippocampus, which is the storage area of your brain, the filing cabinet, if you like, which is where your mental model of the world is stored. Okay, so these two things, the amygdala and the hippocampus, basically detect a threat. The amygdala goes, is this a threat? And the hippocampus goes, yeah, it's a big threat. Let's do something about it, right? And when they've determined together that this thing needs to be dealt with, okay, the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, your brain security guard, kicks off a survival response to the hypothalamus, which is the chemist in your brain, okay? And the chemist will then release into your body stress chemicals. So things like cortisol, which is our chemical that keeps us, that makes our hands strong so we can fight the threats. We get adrenaline that makes our feet fast so we can run from the threats, and a pile of other things that together we could call stress. Stress being simply the chemicals that are released into our body from our minds when our brain interprets a threat to our survival. And when this happens, we feel it in our body, right? So as I say, our hands start to clench, our palms might go sweaty, my heart rate increases, My feet might become fast, my oxygen starts to deplete. All of these things happen, right? When this stress is released into my body. But the prime reason for all of this being dumped into my body is to either fight the threats or run from the threats. That's why this area of our brain is often called the fight-flight area of our brain. And in this instance, I'm calling it fight, flight, freeze. Some people would even refer to it as fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And I'm going to talk about those 4 things. But ultimately, the 2 best ways of surviving the threat are to fight it or run from it. Agreed? There isn't really anything else we can do to survive that threat, right? If we freeze, it's out of our control, right? But along with that, because it's the emotional brain, comes the emotional responses that go with fight, flight, and freeze. So if once this threat response, this survival response has been kicked off, the stress has been released into my body, and I'm in fight, flight, freeze, then fight, flight, freeze really are the only protective responses that my brain has available in order to keep me alive, right? So fight, I tend to be angry when I want to fight something, right? Rah, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to beat it, I'm going to win this. Flight tends to be much more about anxiety. Oh my goodness, there's this thing chasing me, I need to get away, keep me safe, run, right? That's kind of anxiety. Might also go into the freeze state, and freeze state tends to be associated with depression, where depression means that overwhelming feeling of being out of control and powerless to do anything about it because there's a big threat coming towards me and there's nothing I can do about it, right? Fawn might also belong in here, spelled F-A-W-N, fawning over something, mainly meaning, you know, if I just stay small and I just stay helpful, maybe I'll be safe, right? Like that kind of thing. And along with that tends to come people-pleasing behaviors or kind of self-abandonment type issues, right? But these are the only ways that my brain can respond when my brain has interpreted a threat to my survival. And when it has stepped in to help, unfortunately, it switches off the intellectual brain because it doesn't want me thinking strategically about how to get away from the threat. It just wants me operating from fight, flight, or freeze. So I now have no ability to think logically. That means under a threat response, in a stress state, I lose access to rational thoughts, intellectual thoughts, any kind of ability to make a good decision, and any way to come up with a good solution to the problem. Does that sound familiar when you're in a stress state? Hopefully, yes. Yeah, okay, some nodding, great, okay. Now, and obviously when this happens, there will be some other symptoms that come along with this, right? So generally, or consequences. So there will be some symptoms and consequences that you feel in your body physically, that psychologically you process in your mind. It will affect your cognition, it will affect your behavior, and all kinds of things get affected when this happens. Now, this is all great. This explains what happens when our brain interprets a threat, and a threat meaning something that is filed in your filing cabinet, right? Now, we all file things differently as threats in our own filing cabinets, which is why we all respond differently to threats, right? There are some threats that all of us would respond to in the same way, like if a big, angry 18-foot bear appeared at my window trying to get in through my window, we'd probably all respond in the same way, right? We probably all got that filed in our filing cabinet as a massive threat to our survival, especially in the UK where we don't have any bears at all, and it would just be really odd. But we'd all respond in the same way. But there will be other things like spiders, for example. So in my filing cabinet, I have spiders filed as a threat to my survival because I'm terrified of them, right? So they are filed in my filing cabinet as a threat. Now, here's a thing. My primitive brain cannot distinguish between a real threat and an imagined threat. So the threat does not have to be a real threat to my survival. It just has to be filed in my filing cabinet as a threat or a danger, right? Something that I have associated in my emotion brain with emotional fear attached to it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so if in my filing cabinet I filed spider as threat, then when I think about a spider or I see a spider, doesn't matter which, because my brain can't tell the difference, then I go into that fear state. My amygdala gets my chemist, or question, there's a question. Is that a question from Wanda? I can see a hand raised.
Yeah, sorry. I'm
Don't
not good with
apologize.
my phone. I'm not good with my phone, and I have to leave by 1 o'clock. And so I won't be around for the question and answer period. But I had a question for you
Sure.
because I hate science. So this
Oh,
listening is killing me, but your images of the brain and your highlighting and things are helping me, right? And so I'm wondering, how does a person like myself, I'm always in, I don't want to be emotional, but I'm always in fight flight mode
okay.
because of the traumas I've lived. And I thought I overcame most of my trauma. I've been through all kinds of things as everybody else has. And my mother's in a nursing home now.
Okay.
So what I thought I recovered from, or I thought I was okay with, seem to be popping up, those past traumas, right? I don't want to be in a state of flight, fright mode with my mother. And that's what my mental is. I'm almost 60. So my mental's been doing this since she threw me out of her house at 12. And again, I thought we were in a great space. And she's got the onset of dementia. So I'm struggling because I don't want to look at her as the manipulative, hurtful person she was to me, because I'm the only one she has literally physically in this world outside of my one other sister who associates with her. And I'm struggling with that. So my question is, sorry, I'm long-winded. How does a person who feels like they weren't in fight mode find themselves back there? How do they reinvent, not reinvent, but reevaluate their circumstance to know that it's like my mother can't hurt me now. She's in a nursing home. And I know that, like you were saying, consciously, but subconsciously, the little digs that I've experienced throughout my life have hurt me to my core. And I thought I forgave her. I even told her I forgave her. And then over Christmas, I had her come spend the night from the nursing home. And that was a fiasco for me. And we didn't fight or anything. It was just very stressful. And I know I can't do it again. And I feel bad for that. And so my question is, how does a person who finds themselves back in that state pull themselves back out with that person that might have been their trespasser?
Okay. So it's a really good question, and I'm really sorry to hear everything you've been through, Wanda. So I'm gonna try answer it really fast. I'm not going to do it justice because it's not really a question I can answer quickly, but I'll do my best. Okay. So imagine that. So you have all of this stuff stored in your filing cabinet in your brain, right? This part at the bottom of your brain. Now, the problem with files in our filing cabinet is the emotion can be reduced in them when we work with a professional therapist, okay? But the memory itself does not get discarded. The file still lives in the filing cabinet. It's simply that some of the emotion gets reduced in it, so it doesn't trigger us all the time. Does that make sense so far, Wanda?
Absolutely. And I'm appreciating this because I talked to my psychiatrist at 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Well, then get them to give you a longer answer, right?
They will. And that's why I'm eager to throw this question out to you so we have that to conversate about.
Okay. So, but I think it will be helpful to everyone on the call as well to answer this question. So
absolutely.
So when you've been working with your therapist or your psychiatrist, they will have helped you rationalize. So they will have got into your logic brain, your intellectual brain, and helped you rationalize some of this stuff from a logical perspective. But when we're in a stress state, we don't have access to that part of our brain. We only have access to the primitive brain and all of the stuff that's stored in it. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Because our brain can't tell the difference between something that's real and imagined, every time I think about something bad that has happened in the past, or that might happen in the future, because my brain can't tell the difference between real and imagined, it can't differentiate between something that might have happened in the past, it thinks it's happening now, or something that I imagine might happen in the future, it thinks it's happening now. It puts another piece of evidence in that file of why that thing is so terrifying and must be avoided at all costs. So every time you talk about the thing with somebody, every time you think about the thing, every time you imagine the thing, and of course, when we're in that stress state, we're in a stress-focused state where we must remain focused on the threat, right? Because in primitive times, if there really was a lion coming towards me, I couldn't go, oh, look, a butterfly, right? I need to stay focused on the lion, right? So I stay focused and vigilant on the threats. So of course, the more focused and vigilant I become, the more I'm thinking about the thing, the more evidence goes in that file of how terrifying this thing is and how much it must be avoided. So the file in the filing cabinet, even if here's the thing, and this is not in your case, Wanda, right? In your case, a real thing happens, a real event happens a number of times. But the thing doesn't have to have happened for the evidence to go into the file. It can simply be a thought or a memory popping into your head about the thing that's happened that goes into the file. It could be an imagined scenario going into the file. It could be a what if thought. What if I get there and she's reverted to type, can go into the file, right? So every time you have a thought like that, it just goes straight back into the file again. So you might well have removed some of the emotion in that file when you work with your psychiatrist. But as long as you're continuing to think about what's happened in the past, focus on what's happened in the past, keep allowing your brain to go there, you're just building up another file again full of emotion. And that's why it gets triggered. So because that file, remember, once you've got a file in your filing cabinet, it's stored in your memory. It's kind of like, it's kind of why they say, you never forget how to ride a bike. Things are stored in the memory. So even if you haven't done it for 70 years, and I'm nearly 62, Wanda, right? I'm 58 next week, so I'm nearly with you. But it's these things, I haven't ridden a bike since I was 11. Now, if I got on one, I would kind of, that pattern, that habit still lives in my brain, right? It might be a bit rusty. It's like a pathway in a forest.
Try roller skating, girlfriend. I did that and I learned I don't want to do that no more.
There you go. Okay, yeah, and I've never done it, right? But it's a little bit like a pathway in a forest, right? If enough people walk on a path in a forest, it creates a pathway, right? And you can see the path. And it's a little bit like the same as the neural pathway in your brain. The more you use that highway, the more you channel your focus to that thought, the more you're creating that pathway in your brain. And if you've thought about these things for 60 years, that you've got a super highway in your brain, right? That's not like a country lane. That's a super highway with 10 roads of traffic on it. So the weeds can grow up over that after a little while of you not thinking about it. But the second you think about it again, you're right back on the path. So I would recommend that with your psychiatrist, you figure out a way, because there's stuff that's coming out in your language where so it's important for you to instead of focusing on what you don't want, get your psychiatrist to help you focus on what you want your life to look like now. what your future, what the new future looks like. Because here's the thing, Wanda, if I say to you, don't think about a blue elephant, what's the first thing that pops into your mind?
The blue elephant.
Correct. Even though I said don't do it, right? Why? Because the brain cannot process the word not. Not actually isn't even a word. It simply, in the English language, means logical negation. So in order to know what not to do, what not to think about, I have to think about the thing first, right? So if what you want is to not be cross with your mother, well, you have to think what being cross looks like in order to think what not cross looks like, right? So you just need to change your language slightly to go, I want to have a loving relationship with my, whatever it is you want, right? And get your psychiatrist to help you focus your mind on what you want rather than what you don't want. Because as long as you're focusing on what you don't want, you're filling that filing cabinet up again with emotions that belong to old trauma. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. I appreciate you for taking your time out of the scientific piece to explain that to me, because I was like talking to Amy on the inbox and was like, I don't do science and I gotta go at 1 o'clock. And she was like, just ask a question. And so I appreciate you taking my question. I will at 1 o'clock go about 5 minutes to 1, getting out of here, going to talk to her, and we are going to talk about this, because what I want is to be a good daughter. What I want is to know she has 4 children and she has literally no other family except for her 4 children, and only 2 of us deal with her. And so what I want is for her to have the best. Unfortunately, she's in a home because of the onsets of dementia, and me and my sister can't live with her. Physically, our environments don't sustain that. And so I've been really struggling the last month or so with some of the things she says, and I keep trying to be mindful, because I am a certified peer specialist, that this isn't in her control. And that's difficult for me, and I'm learning. And so I appreciate all the scientific. I've been screenshotting your brain images as well.
I can
So
send them
thank
to you.
you
It's
so
fine.
much, and I don't mean to intrude on everybody else's time.
It was a great question, right? Because the question you asked will be relevant to every single person on this call. So I'm really glad you asked it. And I think that's the importance of questions, right? If you're thinking it, so are a lot of other people, Wanda.
Thank you. And there's a question that came in that I think relates to it. So I'm going to dismiss myself, not by leaving, but by muting myself, and let you continue on with what you're doing. Thank you so much, Miss Marcelle. You're doing wonderful, and I appreciate you.
Good luck at 1 o'clock. Good luck with it all. I don't know what.
Thank you, honey.
Okay, take care. So was there another question, or shall I crack on? Because I haven't got a hand raised and I'm not looking at the chat.
Yep, you've got another question coming in now.
I have got another question coming in now. Hello.
Is that my question? I'm not sure.
Yes, it is.
So I appreciate your explanation there. I think it's fabulous. It resonates in a lot of ways.
Right.
However, how does someone learn from a trauma without thinking about it? Like, you go through something or multiple things repeatedly. Obviously, it's going to be stored. I appreciate the thought about focusing on what you want.
Yeah.
However, there are occasions where you need to learn. For example, if someone is attacked, how do you prevent yourself from being attacked in the future? Or
Agreed.
things like that. So you get the gist of what I'm asking.
I think it's a perfect question. And if you don't mind, can I save that question to a little bit later on? Because I'm going to come to that, because it's a really crucial question.
Okay.
So it's a really good question. Yeah, so I will come to it. And if I don't, raise 3 hands at me and poke me or something, and I'll make sure I answer it. Okay, so I'll crack on. Are there any other questions, or okay, good. So we've talked a lot about the brain. This is good. Okay. So the one thing I want to say is, not all things that the brain interprets as a threat necessarily lead to trauma, right? So if I use my example of a spider, My brain believes that spiders are a threat. It puts me in a stressed state whenever I see one or think about one. And then I either want to fight the spider, kill it, or run from the spider, right? And I'm not able to think logically, like, how is a little tiny thing like this going to hurt me, right? My logic brain is switched off. But that doesn't lead to trauma. So how are some of the threats stored as trauma? So it's very important here because, as I say, not all threatening events lead to trauma, because the same event can happen to two people. If we think about sort of, I don't know, like a PTSD type event, one person can just kind of dismiss it and it doesn't get stored as a traumatic event that triggers them. And another person, it does get stored. So why does that happen? Okay, so trauma happens when one of the following three things is true in the instance that the event happens. First thing is that the experience is too overwhelming in terms of its intensity. And that intensity can be emotional or physical, right? That's how we can have physical trauma or emotional trauma, right? So the intensity becomes too overwhelming. That's number one. And that may happen because if I'm already in an overwhelmed state, I'm much more likely to then be overwhelmed by something in high intensity. If I'm completely relaxed in the moment that the thing happens, the overwhelm might not get me, right? So it's number one, the experience must be overwhelming in intensity. Number two, it has to happen either like suddenly, or it must escalate quickly, right? That's the next one. So in terms of being attacked, that would be one of those instances, right? It happens suddenly and it just escalates really quickly. And the third one, which is really important, is there's no support, safety, or time to process it because I'm alone. Okay, those are the three things that are much more likely to turn a threat into a trauma in my brain. Okay, and if any of those things happen, right, it's just too much, it's too fast, or I'm too alone, then the brain cannot make sense of it in the moment that it's happening. That means this hippocampus, the filing cabinet in my brain, can't file it anywhere. What happens is it remains live and unprocessed in my brain and my nervous system, rather than being stored in a filing cabinet as an event that has happened. There's no past tag attached to it. It's live and unprocessed. It's living in my system as something unprocessed and true right now. So even though logically, it's an event that's happened and passed, the primitive brain doesn't have access to the logic brain. It believes this to be live and I keep saying it because we learn through repetition, and this is a really important point. It's live and unprocessed, so it just gets triggered again and again and again until it becomes processed. Okay, that's why trauma can feel so disempowering, because it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're weaker than the other person that didn't store it as trauma. It's because your brain is doing what it thinks will keep you alive, right? That's why the primitive brain takes control. It thinks there's a threat to your survival, okay? And what's going to keep you alive is remaining focused on the threat. And it's going to keep you focused on the threat to your brain. It's still a threat. It's live and in your nervous system, right? That's why it keeps being triggered. So if there's no questions, I'm going to crack on really quickly. So because I have so much content to cover and there may not be time for questions at the end, and I really want to make sure there are. So what's important about this still is, because the brain cannot differentiate between a real event and an imagined event, thoughts will keep the trauma alive, right? Because every time we think about this event that's happened, that's live and unprocessed and still a threat in my system, my brain thinks it's happening again. And when my brain thinks it's happening again, my body and my mind, because they both affect each other, think and respond as if it's happening again. So we relive the emotion, we relive the fear, we relive all the images that come to mind, all the feelings, they all come flooding back whenever I think about the event. Not because the event is happening in real life, okay, but because your brain has stored it as live and unprocessed. So it keeps triggering that alarm. That's why I said at the very beginning, trauma isn't really about, once the event has passed, it's no longer about the event, but it's more about how we've stored the event in our brain and therefore how we think about the event. Okay. And just one thing I really want to mention is this mind-body feedback loop. This is one of my favorite things to say to people. Nothing magic happens at the neck. The body and mind are connected, right? So if your brain is in a stress state and is alerted to a threat, it's not like there's a door that stops anything going into your body and your body can be all lovely and happy and relaxed while your mind's stressed. No, right? When your brain is stressed, your body is stressed. When your body is stressed, your brain is stressed, right? So even if the trauma's over and done with, your system might still be reacting as if it's happening now because you're thinking about it, which means your body is going to feel it too. So what I would say, or not part of this presentation at all, because in no way, shape or form am I a physical trauma expert, but any kind of healing from trauma really should be body mind, right? The whole body, not just the brain. As I say, I just kind of wanted to point that out because we often forget that the two things are connected. I don't know why people kind of go, you know, this is my mental health. Everything from my neck up is mental and everything from my neck down is physical. What a load of nonsense, right? Nothing magic happens at the neck, right? It's health, the end. So, and then we'll move on. So this is a newsflash then, is our brains now, okay? Because after trauma, our brain wants to understand what's happened to us, right? So it starts to create a narrative to help us make sense of this horrific thing that has happened to us, right? Because the horrific thing is not something that in real life we would ever want to have happened. So our brain starts to make up stories, which in therapist speak, we would say narratives, right? This is where we start to get to our trauma narratives. But ultimately, it's just making up stories, right? And it tells us stories like, if only the thing hadn't happened, if only I'd done something differently, everything would be better if, right? That kind of stuff. And then what it does is it fills in the gaps with what we think would have happened in order to keep us safe. So we make assumptions that this other version of our life, okay, this amazing version, this one where, you know, everything worked out amazingly, brilliantly, okay, would have somehow been better than our current reality and than our current life. But the truth is, newsflash, it is simply a story. It is not true. And we have no proof that this would have turned out the way we imagined it would. The problem with that is you think, oh, well, I'm making up a story that protects me, so what, boo-hoo. Well, actually, unfortunately, we then compare the story version to our current version, and then the current version is lacking, right? It's never going to live up to the fantasy version. And our brain is binary. As we said, the primitive brain is binary. You can't be a little bit dead. You're either dead or alive. So what that means is, if the fantasy version is good, then my current reality is bad. And that's where that's when my emotions then start to get involved. And the mad thing about all of this is our brain is doing it because it thinks it's protecting us, right? That's the mad thing about the whole of this. So let me move on. So why do we get stuck in this type of thinking? Well, as we've said, the brain is looking for meaning and it's looking for control ultimately, because if I have control over something, so when a threat is coming towards me, I'm powerless if I have no control over that threat. Control gives me a little bit more power over my life, right? So we're constantly looking for control and meaning, and our brain scrambles to make sense of what's going on, okay? And what we start to do then is construct this alternative version of life where we had more control and things turned out better. And when we don't have all the facts, and of course we don't have all the facts because it's a story, okay, then our brain idealizes the outcome. And this is what we call in the trade rosy retrospection. Isn't that a lovely phrase? Sounds lovely, right? Rosy retrospection, kind of like rose-tinted glasses, right? And what that really means is we imagine past possibilities in a more positive light than would actually have happened in real life, okay? So because of this rosy retrospection and this illusion, okay, of what could have been, we get stuck in this type of thinking because it makes us feel happy in the moment, except it doesn't, right? So why do we do it? Well, first off, our brain wants to prioritize avoiding regret, right? Regret is not a good thing, so it wants to avoid it, okay? So what it does is it convinces us that had things gone differently, we would have been happier, we would have been more complete, life would have been better, life would have been amazing, right? Because it wants us to avoid regrets. Bear in mind, none of this is logical, right? This is not the world of the logic brain. This is the world of the primitive emotional brain that thinks it's protecting us. It doesn't understand logic. It's not working on logic. It's working on emotion. So it's trying to avoid regret. The problem with that, of course, is hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Okay. But in the moment, it's quite deceptive because this story that we're telling ourselves edits out all of the uncertainties and the struggles and the crappy bits that would have happened in that life too, right? Doesn't tell us any of that, okay? And you can be sure that nothing is ever 100% rosy, right? But rosy retrospection will tell us it is. We then start to idealize what we've missed, okay, because we believe this story to be true, so now we've missed it, right? So for example, if we've lost somebody close to us, or we've lost part of our identity, or we've lost something of ourselves, right, then our brain, again, so illogical, tries to protect us from even deeper grief by imagining that relationship being perfect. Okay, that's what it does. Okay, it's what we call selective editing. Again, it's a bit like rosy retrospection, and unfortunately leads to more emotional pain than we would have started with in the first place. But that's what it does. Again, not logical. And finally, acceptance, which is, it's a word that us therapists love, acceptance, right? But accepting that this version of my life is my real life, that's hard when it's got crappy bits in it, right? So the brain creates a better movie reel for me, a better storyline for me, a better narrative for me, because hope seems like an easier strategy than acceptance or grief. So I have hope for this other version, right? But the problem with this is, even though all of this might seem helpful, none of it actually is. That's the sad fact, right? And the last part of this puzzle is, once we've started telling ourselves all of these narratives and these stories, we don't challenge them, right? We just accept them as truth. So now we believe the stories as if they were true. And as I've already said, The emotional brain's binary. So if that story version is good, then my current reality must be bad. That's why we start to make up the other narratives in the first place. Okay. So quick yes or no in the chats. Have you, in fact, let's just have yeses, okay? Have you ever found yourself in this loop where you've been telling yourself story after story after story, believing it as if it's true, not challenging it, and only just now realized this is what you've been doing? We've got some yeses, have we? Yeah,
Yes,
we've got
we
some
do.
yeses. Yes,
Yeah,
we do.
a bunch
Okay.
of yeses here.
Okay. And it's not, and I think it's really important, right? First of all, look how many of us do it, right? It's not just you, okay? But secondly, it's not your fault. Your brain has been put on alert and you've been left with this unprocessed thing. So we are going to figure out how you can process it without causing more trauma, right? I am going to get to that. So now the good part, right? Let's raise up a gear. Have I done an hour? Have I done an hour so far? Okay. So we're going up a notch, right? Now we're moving on to how do we get unstuck, right? The part that people have been waiting for a whole hour from me. If you need to go get a cup of tea, go get a cup of tea. We can breathe. Does anybody need like a comfort break for 2 minutes? Cup of tea, toilet break, anything? Or do we carry on?
Yeah, we can carry on. If you need a break, we can.
No, I'm good. I mean, I'm like a Duracell bunny, right? I just keep going. So we're all good. Okay.
It's amazing. Don't want to miss a moment in tea getting.
Okay. So this is how you get unstuck. Now let's talk about it. So when I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. Many therapists and or helpful friends, okay, at this moment that you are stuck in this trauma loop, will start to tell you to see the gift in the trauma, right? Find the, Amy's pulling a face. I can see Amy's face, right? Well, let's talk about the gift, right? And you just want to smack them in the face because there is no gift right now, right? There's no positives right now. There's no gift in the thing that this thing is horrible, right? So I want to reassure you that, to be fair, whilst they have a point, right? If you are not at that point in the journey, it's a really stupid thing to say, right? So I am not going to say it on this call. I'm not going to tell you to find the gift or to start writing down the positives. That's not where I'm going. I just want to reassure you with that, right? Because at the beginning of this journey, you might not feel like there are any, you just might not be able to see them. Okay. That said, as a caveat, it can be helpful to try and focus on just anything positive in your life, anything you're grateful for, things that are small in your day that give you comfort, that you could think of as a good thing. Because when trauma has a grip on us, we stay in our primitive brain, right? We stay focused on survival and we stay focused on problems and threat and danger. The logic brain is kind of where we need to be in order to start seeing a different perspective. So to do that, it can be super helpful to get the chemist in our brain, instead of the chemist constantly mixing up stress all the time. Think of this chemist. The chemist in our brain the one that mixes up the stress for us. It lives in the primitive brain. So you can think of it as like a chemist that's got one test tube in the smallest chemistry lab in the country, right? It's got one test tube. So if it's mixing up stress constantly for us, it can't mix up happiness or joy or any of that other good stuff. So if you can get it to switch to mixing up even just a little bit of happiness in your day, then it's not mixing up stress in that moment. So I would say it can be a good thing, if you can, at this moment in time, to start to think about, on purpose, that puts you in your thinking brain, your conscious brain, just one thing that's been good in your day. At the end of your day, just reflect, just one thing that's been good. So for me, always My first good thing is always my first cup of coffee in the morning. And the second good thing is that I bought myself a beautiful mug to put it in. So whenever I drink from it, I feel joy, right? So in that moment, it doesn't have to be big, right? We're not talking big and like I haven't won the lottery. I haven't, you know, we're not talking big things. We're talking really small things. Did the dog give you a kiss? Did the cat sound of the cat purring calm you? You know, do you like the sound of the birds outside the window? It doesn't have to be big, right? It can be tiny, but just start to find the moments of joy that can, and it's hard to do, by the way. It's when you're in the grips of trauma, it's really hard to do. But if you don't do it on purpose, it won't happen because your primitive brain's job is not to make you happy. Your primitive brain's job is to keep you alive. It does not care about the quality of your life. You have to care about the quality of your life. So you have to do the thinking of good things by yourself on purpose. Bye, Wanda. She's gone. Okay, so that's my caveat. That was a long caveat. So instead of trying to focus on positives and find the gift and let go of the story, right? Or move your brain to somewhere it's not ready to go to yet. The goal of an exercise I'm about to give you is simply to loosen the grip just a little bit, okay? The grip that this past event has on you, okay? So this is what we're going to do. So we know your brain has been making up stories, all of these what ifs and if onlys, assuming that this other version of your life was going to be perfect and that this version of your life sucks, right? That's the story it's telling you. However, oops, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. Instead of accepting it as truth, because we've said your brain is making up stories, right? Let's start to challenge some of the stories. Let's start to challenge some of the narratives it's telling you. So I'm just going to put up a bunch of questions. You might want to screenshot the screen, or I can send these to you off. I can send it to Amy and she can send it to you afterwards. But these are some really good questions for you to think about and journal on later. Okay. What story are you stuck in? Okay. What is the story that your brain is telling you about this other version of your life? Okay, so to answer, and I didn't take the name of the person that asked me the questions. It sounded like a Dutch kind of sounding name, Van something, but I'm assuming that was a surname, not a first name.
Correct. That's Curriculum.
Oh, is that Dutch?
It is. My husband's Dutch. Yes.
That sounded very Dutch because I used to live in Amsterdam. But what was your name? Sorry, I didn't ask your name.
Margie.
Margie. Okay, so we're going to come to your question in a little bit, right? But this is one of the ways in which you don't need to focus on the traumatic event. You just need to focus on the narrative your brain is telling you, right? The good thing, this other version, this rosy perspective that it's giving you, okay? What is the story that you're stuck in? This, my life would have been better if, okay? What are you actually assuming about this better version, right? What are some of the gaps that your brain has filled in that simply aren't true, and they're just assumptions that you have not questioned? What proof do you have that it would have turned out the way your brain is telling you it would have turned out? What might not have worked out as you imagine? Are you romanticizing a life that didn't even ever exist? And would it really have been that simple? Okay, these are some good questions to ask. And if I think about my sort of not parent expected world, if I use an example from there, one of the things that often comes up is, if only I'd met my biological father before he passed away, right? And then I've got a whole narrative around that. Now I was in that place. So when I found out I was an NPE, everyone's gone, right? My mother's died, my dad died in 1985, and my biological father died in 1994. So I had no one to ask any questions of. So my brain could easily have gone to, oh, if only I'd got to talk to my biological father, if only I'd known earlier, I would have had this amazing relationship with him, right? Now, a little bit of extra information here for you, which is fact. I actually knew my biological father when I was a child, but I didn't know he was my biological father. So until I was about 6, he was just this man in my mother's life. I adored him. I idolized him. And then when I was 6, he went back to the States and I never saw him again. So my brain went to, well, I had this amazing history with, it would have been amazing. Do you know what? It might not have been. He might have been horrible, right? I don't know how he would have turned out. I don't know if he wanted me to know I was his child. I don't know what he was like when he was in his 80s. I don't know if the view I had of him until I was 6 was how it would have been when I was 50, right? All of these things are assumptions that my brain made to give me this rosy perspective on how it would have been if only I'd got to meet him. But I don't know any of those things to be true. They're just story. They're just narrative. So luckily, as a trained therapist, I went through these questions, right? And actually, I just accept now, well, I can't change it. But what I do have is the fond memories of the past, right? And now 2 brothers. So it's really important to start challenging some of the assumptions and the story that your brain is giving you, right? And this isn't about forcing you to feel better. This is about just creating an opening to let in another possibility. That this what if thinking that has got hold of you isn't actually true. So that you can start to let go of it. Because there might be a different version of what your brain is telling you, right? So you don't have to, and if you don't want to let go of the story, don't let go of the story. I'm not saying this is what you've got to do, okay? But this what if thinking is not helping you because it keeps you stuck in the trauma loop, okay? You never get to acceptance and dealing with the trauma because you're constantly filling your brain with the what if stuff, okay? So you don't have to let go of the story completely. Just start questioning whether the version that your brain has created for you is as perfect as it would have you believe. Okay. Now, there's another question that I want you to also think about when you're doing this exercise, which is this one, and it's really important, which is not only is your brain telling you stories and giving you a rosy perspective on this new, better version of your life, it's also telling you stories about your existing life. So it's really important to answer this question. What am I forgetting about this version of my life that also isn't true and actually doesn't suck as much as my brain might have me believe? Okay, this is where you can start again you will start to see the positives and the gift and all of that kind of stuff, right? But not from a place of what's the gift in this, right? But you'll start to see, actually, do you know what? Well, this thing that my brain is making me believe, you know, well, that's not quite true, right? Okay, so this is a really good way to start to prize yourself out of this what if thinking. Okay, that's method 1. And now I'm going to go on to any questions on this, or is this helpful? Okay, I've got a heart, so I'm going to move on. Thanks, Amy. So the next slide is what I call the 90-year-old you method. Okay, so imagine that you are 90 years old and you are looking back on your life from the future. Okay, and you're turning and facing the you now, and you're thinking about your what if moments. So now I have some questions for you. As the 90-year-old you, what do you wish the younger you, that's you now in the present moment, would do about this thing? What do you wish they knew? What do you wish they would do? What do you wish what do you want? What actions do you wish they'd take? Right? Because you're looking at it from the future. You're healed and having a fabulous life at 90, right? But this version of you is stuck in this trauma loop. What do you wish you knew? Another question for you. Does the 90-year-old you want you to spend another 5 years stuck in this loop? Another 10 years, another 20 years, another 6 months, another month? Probably no, right? And if 90 years is too much for you, go to the end of May. Where are we? The something of May. Go to the end of May. May the 31st, 2025. Go there, okay? And you're in a different place. What's changed? Okay, don't you want to feel different by the 31st of May? Wouldn't that be great? Even if it was just a little bit. Okay, so what do you need to do to make that happen? Okay, rather than what if, what now? What do I do now? Okay, so what small thing might future you ask you to focus your mind on instead of the what if loop that might be more helpful for you? Okay. So these are just 2 ways you can get yourself out of the what if thinking. So I'm going to ask real quick, actually, if you are liking either of these, do you think you might try either one of these? If you think you might try one of these, put in 1 if you think you might try the method 1, the challenging the story, challenging the narrative, and put in a number 2 if you think you might have a little go at this exercise, the 90-year-old you exercise. And if you don't respond, I'll assume you don't like either of them, and I failed miserably as a expert witness today.
You've got lots of 1s, 2s,
Okay.
both in here.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I want to ask you for a commitment. If you think you want to give one of these a go, can you put a yes in capital letters in the chat if you are going to commit to trying one of these by this weekend? I got any yeses?
You've got a lot of yeses here. Capital
Yay!
lettuces.
Yay! Good for you
Yes.
guys. Hooray!
Lots of action.
Brilliant. So again, if you didn't take screenshots, I can send these slides to Amy and she can send them out to you afterwards if that's what we want to do. And I think I do want to remind you, right? What's super, super important here is you don't have to solve everything right now, right? That's okay. You can't solve everything in one go. You don't have to solve it. Well, not only do you not have to solve everything in one go, you can't solve everything in one go. So just take it one day at a time. And if these strategies don't feel right, that's okay. There are many other strategies that you can try. These are just 2 because I told you I could talk for England. I could talk for way more than 2 hours. I've already talked for a very long time. Can you imagine if I gave you more than 2, right? So I've only given you 2 today, but there are many more strategies that we can try here. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is simply press pause. So just for a minute, we're just going to breathe because I've talked for a long time. I've given you quite a lot of information already. We're nearly at the end. Okay, let's just breathe. Okay, so let's just take a big deep breath in and then a big deep breath out. Just in your own time, at your own pace. Just take 2 more deep breaths in and out at your own time and your own pace. Okay, good. And here's some words of wisdom, right? That you can repeat to yourself. I don't have to figure this out today. This feeling doesn't have to last forever. I can come back to this when I'm ready. Okay? Now, if you start to do these things and you struggle with these things, you might find this is where you need some extra help from a therapist, somebody who helps you shift your mindset and who understands how to help you move forward from trauma. So to answer Margie's question, there are many therapists out there who are trauma-informed therapists who use methodologies that require you to stay focused on the trauma, talk about the trauma, dwell on the trauma, revisit the trauma every way, shape, form. Okay. Now, that is not a methodology that I like, right? It is not my methodology, but it works for many people because some people want to immerse themselves in it and understand every nuance. Okay. I find that unhelpful because, as we know, the brain can't distinguish between real and imagined. So every time you think about it, focus in it, your file's getting fatter. It takes you a really long time to feel better. So I imagine that there are people on this call who do not agree with me, and that's fine because we all do things differently. But that is not my approach as a therapist. I am what's called a solution-focused therapist. So my job is to get people to shift their mindset to think about how they would like to feel, how they would like to, if a trigger pops up, how would they like to respond? So we work on things like, what would you like to feel emotionally? What are some of the actions, the habits that you would like to build, right? And what we don't do, to start with at least, is focus on anything to do with the trauma. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean we won't come back to it, doesn't mean we won't refer to it, but what we never do is dwell on it. Okay. I think the past is fine to visit, but it is not a place to dwell, right? So that's my methodology. There are also hypnotherapists, and I do use hypnotherapy in my practice, that use a practice called a rewind. A rewind is kind of a good hybrid between solution-focused and immersive, okay? And a rewind technique is essentially, well, it kind of does what it says on the tin. A hypnotherapist will put you into a relaxed state. So when you're relaxed, that means the primitive brain is no longer in a stress state. When the primitive brain is no longer in a stress state, the logic brain can now start to look at the trauma from a different perspective, okay? And what you do is you replay, under hypnotherapy, replay the movie of the trauma, and you do this yourself, okay? Almost like you're in a movie theater. You play it over and over and over again until the primitive brain goes, oh my God, I'm bored with this movie. How often do I need to watch this movie, right? But ultimately, the movie always ends with you alive. So the primitive brain doesn't need to get its knickers in a twist. It's already in a relaxed state, okay? And now it's just bored by the thing. And what it's done essentially is removed some of that emotion under hypnotherapy, which then allows your primitive brain to store the memory as it should have been stored in the first place. Okay, so you can kind of process it, but you're not necessarily processing it by focusing on it and thinking about it. Now, those are just 3 ways of dealing with trauma. There are many other ways, and we can chat about them. I mean, I'm more than happy to have a chat if you want to reach out to me, or I can send some information across. But focusing on the trauma and talking about the trauma is only one method that can be utilized by a therapist. It's probably the most common method utilized by psychiatrists and psychotherapists. But as I say, as a solution-focused therapist, it's not something I ever do because it goes against every grain of my brain being going, why am I getting this person to just keep focusing on a thing that's so traumatic? Does that answer your question, Margie? Great. Okay, good. Super. So You're all yeses, you're all in, you're all committed. I won't ask for any homework, but you know, it's good that and this is it, right? It's just about deciding you're going to do something about it, right? That's what's important. Okay, so now here comes a reality check. Now, I'm going to refer, so Amy will know this, but probably most people on the call won't. I'm going to refer here to something called sliding doors, right? I said at the beginning, I call this sliding doors thinking. And the reason I call this sliding doors thinking, it's my analogy for it, is there's a movie called Sliding Doors in the UK. It's a UK movie, British movie, back in the 90s with Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow with an English accent, so worth a watch if you haven't seen it. Okay. And ultimately, Gwyneth Paltrow plays this woman who, you know, she's got a boyfriend and a flat and she's going off to work and she reaches what we call the underground, but you call the subway. Okay, so it's really about a point in her life where a single moment changes everything. So we see her rushing to the subway. She runs down the stairs. She gets onto the platform, and the tube train, the subway train, is there on the platform with the doors open. And then suddenly the screen of the movie splits. And it's called sliding doors because the subway train doors slide, right? And the screen splits into two. And in one of the screen splits, the doors stay open and she gets on the train. And in the other screen split, the doors close and she misses the train. And that single moment is pivotal in terms of the rest of her life. If only I'd caught the train, if only I hadn't missed the train, whatever it might be, right? And then we get to see, through the whole of the movie, we see the two alternative versions of her life play out. We don't know which one's real, but they play out. And the reason that I call this sliding doors moment is this is what we're doing, right? We create these alternate versions and our brain cannot distinguish the real one from the imagined one. So ultimately, all the versions of your story exist. And your brain has no idea which one is real. The past version where this thing didn't happen, well, that exists because you're thinking about it all the time. So it exists in your mind. The version where you did something different, well, that exists in your mind. The version where the event happens and it was awful, that one exists in your mind. They all exist in your mind. All these different versions. And your brain does not know which version is real. But you do. The only version that truly exists is this life, right? This one where the thing has happened or hasn't happened, where you did the thing you did or didn't do. That's the version that's real, okay? So the questions here will be, what is it that you need to do to make peace with the life that is? And given we know that your idealized version, your idealized story, your imagined story has this amazing stuff going on in it, okay? What parts of that amazing life can you bring into this life? Is there anything in that imagined version that you look like, that you're doing, that you feel like, that you think like, that's happening, that you could bring into your life now? I mean, it's real in your brain. Why not make it real in your life now? Okay. As Wanda said, right? Do you roller skates in this other one? Well, take up roller skating, right? Do it. Why not? Are you confident in the other one? Did you kick ass in the other one? Do it in this one. Learn how to do it. Okay. What is it that you can bring into this life that you're not doing? Learn how to do that. What do you have control over in your life today? You can learn to roller skate. You can be a confident kick-ass if you like, right? You can learn to do all that. You have control over that. And the biggest thing you have control over is your thoughts. In fact, it's one of the only things you have control over. You always have control over your thoughts and your actions. Everything else is up to chance. Okay. And so I think I'm gonna, oh, just before I end, I have got one thing, good news. And I've already talked about this actually when I answered Wanda's question. There is good news, right? In that all of these little pieces, okay, when we have these kind of trauma events, these live unprocessed things, your brain, it's under what's called neuroplasticity. Your brain is plastic, right? Your brain can change, it can move files around, it can process things differently, okay? You are not an old dog that cannot learn new tricks, right? You can learn new stuff every day. So, and so can your brain. So your brain is capable of reorganizing memories. It's called reconsolidation. You can look it up if you want to. And reconsolidation does what I told Wanda it did, which is ultimately, it doesn't delete the file out of your filing cabinet, right? It's still a memory. But what it does is it updates the emotional charge that was filed with that thing floating around. Okay. So when you process trauma using a professional to help you, what you will do is process the memory in a more helpful way. And then you give that memory a new place to live in the filing cabinets, where it just doesn't get, every time the filing cabinet, where every time the file is pulled out, it doesn't trigger the alarm system. So I'm going to use an example again from my real life here. So in 1985, I was 18 years old, right? And if anybody else lived in 1985, you'll know that we had discos. No longer have discos, right? They're not, I think they're called nightclubs now, but they were called discos back in the day. And on the disco, you had like a multicolored floor with lots of squares that lit up, and the music was disco music, right? Motown disco, jazzy, funky, dancey stuff, right? And the fashion was, for women at that time, I had this blue, it was a bright blue, electric blue satin dress with big shoulders, okay, that I wore to this disco. No idea why. I don't think anybody ever wore blue satin to discos, but it's what I wore, and I'm proud, okay? So I was wearing this blue satin dress and very high-heeled black patent stilettos. They were about 5 inches high, because I'm only 5'4". I don't know whether you work in feet and inches, but I'm not very tall, right? So big, tall shoes, because I think my boyfriend at the time was 6 foot and I needed to be tall, right? So we went to this disco and I raced onto the dance floor thinking I was going to shake my tush on the dance floor, okay? But here's the thing, the dance floor was quite slippery because there was drink over it. I know Margie's pulling the face that I pulled when I was doing it, exactly. And my patent shoes slipped, so I fell over on the dance floor. And then because I was wearing a satin dress, I literally skidded all the way across it, okay? Now at the time, I know, thanks Amy, it was mortifying, right? Now, it was mortifying. Could we call that traumatic? Kinda, right? To an 18-year-old with her first boyfriend at a disco, making an absolute idiot of herself. Traumatic, okay? Kelsey's laughing. Everyone else is looking shocked, but Kelsey's laughing at me, okay?
No, it's so horrible. Oh.
But here's the thing, right? Over time, I've reprocessed that. And now I think it's hilarious and I'm not afraid to tell the story. That is a memory in my filing cabinets where I have removed the awful emotional charge assigned to it, reassigned it to a new file in my filing cabinet now, which is now called Awful Things That Happened to Marcelle That Are Hilarious to Tell in Public, right? I've just moved it in the filing cabinet. But that took time, right? Because certainly for about 10 years, I didn't want to tell anyone what had happened, right? But that's just a really stupid example of how something that is mildly traumatic can be moved, okay? And actually, in this case, moved to tales that can be told as funny stories rather than just put it in a cupboard and never talk about it again type file, right? But the fact being, we can move our files in our memory. We can change the emotion that they are stored with. And once we do that, it is no longer live and unprocessed. It is processed memory and stuck in the filing cabinet. Okay, makes sense? Super duper. Glad you all got a giggle on my watch there. So I think one last thing real quick. So there are some, so if the lead actor in our story so far is mindset, okay, and thoughts, we've got some supporting actors here that are really, really important in terms of supporting emotional processing. And I would say the first one, without a doubt, could be cats, but probably sleep, right? So sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things, and I rarely use the word must or need to, but I will absolutely say it here. You need to get good quality sleep, okay? Sleep is important for restoring and renewing our physical body. That's the deep sleep part of sleep. But also our emotional memory. So the REM phase of sleep, the rapid eye movement dream phase of sleep, is where we process emotional memories. If you are not getting good quality sleep, you will struggle to get out of a stress state. It is our biological mechanism for emptying at your stress bucket. So if, and I'm not a big, I'm quite pragmatic about these things, right? I don't care about the number of hours you're getting. What I care about is the quality of the hours you're getting. Because if you're getting 9 hours sleep, but in that 9 hours you're sleeping for 45 minutes, that is rubbish sleep. If you're getting 5 hours and you're asleep for, well, five is still is not great, 6 hours sleep, but 6 hours like without waking up and it's good quality, that's much better than tossing and turning for 8 hours, right? So sleep is the number one thing you must sort out, okay? If you need any, I mean, I have a whole course on sleep. I can just give you the link to it. So if anyone wants it, you can have it. Because I trained in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So I have a whole course on how to sleep better if that's what you want. Ask me, I will send you the link. It's free, so you can have it. The second one is grounding. So for me, that means any kind of movement, action, breathing, anything about bringing your body back to the present moment. Super, super important. Because if your body, remember your body and your mind are attached, if your body's in the present moment, look, in the present moment, no threat, no trauma, nothing's happening, nothing bad, okay? That means my brain can relax a little bit. My brain only really gets its knickers in a twist if it's thinking about something that has happening or it's predicting something that might happen in the future. It generally doesn't get itself bothered by things, by sitting on my couch right now listening to a talk, right? So really important, any kind of exercises that bring your body back into the present moment. Mindfulness being part of that, right? So for me, mindfulness is mastering the art of focusing your mind where you want to focus it, right? The art of controlling the spotlight of your attention. So when your mind wants to wander like a naughty little puppy, like I think of it like a puppy. The mind is like a puppy, right? An untrained puppy. It goes scampering around and it goes rushing off in fields, okay? But what you want to know is when it's about to roll in fox poo, that you can call it back and it comes on your command. And you need the same thing to happen to your brain. Most of the time, you're happy to let it scamper around and run off lead. But you need to know that you have control over it when it's about to get into danger. Okay, mindfulness is great for that. Journaling is also a great tool. I'm a really rubbish therapist at this because I hate journaling. I don't do it, even though I love writing. But what I do is an equivalent of journaling, which is talking out loud in voice notes and answering things in that way. I'm just not very good at putting, even though I love to write, it's so odd, but I just find it quite, there's a block in my brain about sitting down with an open book and a blank page and not knowing what to write. But I'm really good at talking, if you hadn't noticed. So I do it talking instead of writing, right? So find the method that works for you. What's important is not the method that you use, but just that the emotions and the thoughts have a place to go. Okay. And the final one is just be slow. Just slow down. Life's fast. You need space. You need the ocean. You need the sand beneath your feet. You need self-care. You need self-compassion, all of that stuff. Without these supporting actors, you haven't got a great chance of winning the lead actor award. Okay. And finally, if you take away nothing else other than, gosh, that woman talks a lot, here are 3 takeaways. Number 1, your brain has been telling you stories, but that doesn't mean they're true. Do not believe everything your brain tells you. That's number 1. Number 2, you do not have to force yourself to move on. You do not have to force yourself to see the gift in your trauma, okay? But you can loosen the grip by allowing the possibility that other versions of your story exist. And the only version of your life that matters is this one. So start changing what if to what now. Instead of chasing a past that never was, focus on shaping a future that actually is. And now we can breathe. You will be pleased to know we have 20 minutes for questions if there are any. And breathe. That's it, no questions. Everyone's gone really quiet. I raced through. I'm sorry, I wanted to get all of that information in. Yes, Margie.
So great. It was so great, Marcelle. Like,
oh, Amy, thank you.
Amazing. And I know that people had it. I was following the chat, and there was definitely a lot of just affirmation that this was landing, that this was helpful. So yeah, I think you really did a great service today. Yes, look, I'll rewatch. We got so many questions about where can we find her slot. So if you, everything you share with me, I will post on that on our site. We have the landing page for your talk, and it'll have your video. It has links to your websites, has that picture of you, all of that stuff. So people are really wanting to hear more and go back to what you gave us and all of it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm just looking through all of the chat now. Oh, The Body Keeps Score. Yeah, that's a good book. Yes, I'm seeing lots of yeses, lots of nos. I thought my childhood was perfect till around age 45. Interesting. Yeah, so as I say, I'm kind of a little bit weird in terms of how I think about this stuff. But we've all got to find our way, right? But yeah, it looks like there's 2 questions. There's 2 raised hands.
Yeah, I was going to, I don't know, I don't even know what to ask, but just it was fabulous. Oh my goodness, you know, off and on for the last 10 years, I've had so much, well, longer than that, so much trauma. it's like one to the next. I don't know. I'm probably aging myself, but years and years ago, there was this thing. It was a blow up Bozo the Clown, and it was weighted on the bottom. You could punch it and it would knock down and it'd come back up. And that's basically been my life. There's been so much. And I'm not going to neglect saying I've had so much good too, so many wonderful things. So when come back up. So what I'm getting at is in this hour and a half, I've learned more than I have in my entire life.
Wow.
There's been times when I have tried different types of therapy, and I just didn't get it until now. Now I
Oh,
understand how processing trauma the best way. I did some talk therapy. I still feel that there's a place for that to a degree, but you're right. You never move out of that traumatic state. You never process it properly. It stays there. It triggers quickly when you don't move past that, when you don't find that other narrative. I took so many notes. I know that you're going to share the slides, but I focus better when I take notes. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. I really, really appreciated this. So glad. I just saw the advert last night and I thought,
wow.
okay, and I did not sleep all night, but I got up and I'm so glad I did for this.
Oh, so it was serendipitous, and that serendipity is one of my favorite words.
So,
Um, but I'm so glad that you got something from it, right? And I think, and I wouldn't say necessarily that I'm right in that. So talking therapy definitely has its place. I just think it's one of the things to use in a toolbox of things. And if you are not, the thing about talking therapy, certainly cognitive behavior therapy, that kind of stuff, you need to be in your logic brain in order to do it. And if you're not yet in your logic brain, it's not the right therapy to start with. That's my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right. It's just my opinion. It's what I've found, and it's therefore not my first tool in the toolbox to use in my practice. But it works for some people, right? So I have a friend who's been seeing her therapist for 2 years or something on something, and she's like, oh, and I'm finally getting beyond it. And if my clients are with me for 2 years, I'm like, when are you leaving, right? Like, you don't need me anymore. So but that works for her. So I tend to attract people who like my therapy and like my style, but there are millions of me's who do things differently, who attract the people that like their style, right? That's why it's great that we have so many modalities, so many different types of therapists, but it also then becomes very confusing when you don't know which person to go to and what's going to help you. But I'm super, super glad you were here, and super, super glad you found help from it. That's good. Let me know if you have any questions further going on.
to learn how to access more of what you share, what you use, the modalities that you use. And I don't know if I go through Amy or if there's going to be a link in the chat or what, but I really definitely, I feel like I found where I need to be.
Oh, bless you. So yeah, so I think, so on the slide deck, I've got a website which still is not live. It was supposed to go live before I did this talk, and I haven't set it live because I decided I wanted to do a lot of stuff with the NPE community, with the not parent expected community, just because there are no therapists that understand the trauma that NPEs go through, and
True.
like none that I have found. I'm sure there are some, but not that I found. And I didn't know where to go to for help when I was looking for support and help. I didn't even know the term existed for 2 years. So I decided just to set up a website and help to do that. And so the website address that I've got on the slides is that, but that will go live by the end of this week. And then my goal is just to put out lots of resources. There'll be a YouTube channel, there'll be videos, there'll be all kinds of things coming out on that. But I also have my own, so just under my name, I'm easy to connect to because I'm the only Marcelle Crinean in the world, I think. So I'm super easy to find, you know, on LinkedIn or on my website or anything like that. I'm really easy, but I will send it to Amy. I'm sure Amy will ask what she wants of me, and I will send it to Amy. Oh, is there anything? Yeah, and then Amy will filter things to Amy. Yeah, I'm just looking at the question. Sorry, I just looked at, is there such a thing as a solution-focused therapist for children? Yeah, most of us work with children. I work with children from 6 years old onwards. Not all of us work with children, but I used to be a psychologist for cancer research, and I used to work solely with children. So I moved my practice to also working with children. So yes, a lot of us work with children, but some people are terrified of working with children and don't do it. You just need to make sure that that whoever you work with has the right insurance in place and has an enhanced, certainly in the UK, an enhanced DBS check to make sure they can work with children and vulnerable adults. In the States, all of your laws and licensing are completely different than they are in the UK. But yes, in the UK, we have solution-focused therapists who work with children, for sure. And I have worked with many. Aaron Payson. Aaron, I'm curious about the application of re-narrative techniques to reframe visceral. I don't understand the question, but if you could help me with the question, Aaron, that would be great. Looks like Aaron's got a question.
We can't hear you, Aaron. So I don't know if you're having trouble with.
Yeah, there's no camera and no microphone. So you might need to point your, so if you go to the settings at the bottom, you should be able to change your settings.
How is that now?
I can hear you, but I can't see you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I, for whatever reason, my camera is not showing up, and I apologize.
That's okay.
So my question has to do with the fact that we're in a period of time where many people are having a very visceral reaction every time they turn on the news.
Yeah.
And part of it is the story that we're telling ourselves about what is happening or what the possibility of the future is.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about the idea of alternate narratives that we can use as techniques to construct a different kind of response to what's happening, so that it is not triggering a trauma response, but it is actually triggering our capacity for resiliency.
That's a really good question. So I guess my first question is, what would be a way to stop receiving so much news and so much story, right? That would be my first question. So that would be my first question, which is maybe, like, I don't watch the news, right? Because most of it isn't true, and it's scaremongering. So that's an action that can be taken. But in terms of alternate narratives, this is where I would use a technique very much like the one we've talked about, which is focus on facts and not story. So a lot of what we hear in the press, and I mean, obviously the UK press is different to the US press, and what the news that we get from the US is not the same as the news that you get in the US. So I don't know what stories you can write. So, which already tells me there's a lot of story out there, right? And so our primitive brain will constantly make up stories, and it tends to make up stories using certain language phrases. So the language phrases that, if you start to use any of these language phrases, they are an indication that you are telling yourself a story and not fact, right? So the first one is what I call fortune telling, where we tell ourselves this is going to happen. Okay, that's the first one that generally comes out of news type items. This is happening. This is going to happen. By next week, this is going to happen. How do you know? Do you have a crystal ball? And if you did, could you read it with 100% accuracy? No, no one can tell the future. You just can't. That is a fact. You cannot tell the future, right? So that narrative is already false. It's already a lie. It's already not truth. So whenever you use yourself using a future forecasting, fortune telling type language as fact, right? That's when you can reframe the narrative and you can kind of go, oh, okay, hold on a second. I've just told myself that something's going to happen. And there's a reason we do this, by the way, right? The primitive brain. So if we really take ourselves back to primitive times when man was hunting in the jungle, right? He was out with his tribe and he was trying to capture the deer for the women back at camp. Okay. They had what the men had to do, what the tribe had to do was think about where they last saw the deer and the herds of animal and use that information along with information about herd patterns and the stars and the time of day and the time of year to predict where that herd might be now or might be next week, right? So we learned to take information from the past and use it to predict the future for survival, right? But unfortunately, in today's world, we've got a little bit mixed up with these signals and we're constantly using information from the past to predict the future and then claiming it as though it's fact when it's not fact. Does that make sense so far? Great. So what we need to do is reframe that narrative. So in that same way that we talked about on this talk, it's important to kind of go, hold on a second, what's actually fact here? Well, fact is Trump is, president. Fact is he's there for 4 years. Fact is, I mean, just go through the facts. What are the facts? And start to differentiate fact from story and start to change the narrative that way. So that's one way, right? So looking for future forecasting. If you find you are future forecasting or fortune telling, then the narrative, instead of this is going to happen, like, for example, if I take my NPE example, right? There is no way on earth I would ever have predicted that my dad was not my dad. Like, it doesn't happen in the world, right? It just doesn't. I go, well, I'm going, this is going to happen to, it'll be my dad's birthday next week. And then all of a sudden, no way I could have predicted. I mean, until I was 55 years old, I was British, right? And at 55 years and a bit, I'm half Hungarian. Like, you can't predict. You have no idea. So although we can, Amy's laughing, but it's true, right? So we can't predict the future with 100% certainty. Now, what we might be able to do is go, there's a pretty good chance it's going to happen, right? That's fair. There might well be a high likelihood, a high probability, a good chance. But that is not the same as fact, definite, guaranteed. That gives you a bit like we talked with the story coming in terms of it allows the possibility of another outcome in our story. The fact that we've now got a good chance or a high likelihood of this thing happening, which is still scary, don't get me wrong, right? We still might not want this, but that is significantly different to the brain as 100% likely to happen. Because now it allows the possibility of something different happening. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess where the rubber hits the road for me, I'm a minister.
Okay.
And so, part of the issue is that people are dealing with their response to what they're experiencing. And what they experience is fact. The fact that someone is feeling something is fact. I mean, that someone is feeling something is fact. The issue of people saying this, what I am experiencing is diametrically opposite to what I have been taught to behave like.
Oh, okay.
And feeling feeling as though they're powerless to change a situation that they're experiencing. And so for me, the narrative shift is away from everyone out there having the power to determine what you are, what your values are, and you finding meaningful ways to embody and to demonstrate your values, regardless of what the world is saying, or
Okay.
how the world is being.
Okay. So what I would say to that is feelings are valid, but they are not necessarily fact, right? I think they're a label that we've assigned to it, right? So that's our interpretation of that, but they're totally valid, right? So if I believe I am feeling anxious, or I believe I am feeling angry, or I believe I am feeling sad, or whatever it might be, then that is my belief, which is my truth, but it doesn't mean it's a fact. I'm just going to be really play a little bit of devil's advocate with the minister there, right? But it's
I would absolutely disagree with you
I know you would.
that I do not have the capacity to determine whether or not someone is feeling something as being factual or not.
Correct. You don't. And actually, it doesn't matter. It's totally valid. How they feel is totally valid. Okay. And you're absolutely right. When something is happening that goes against our values, it doesn't make us feel good, right? It can create anxiety, it can create sadness, it can create a whole load of emotions that are totally valid. But if we stay in that mentality, nothing will change. Would you agree with that statement?
Things may change. The question is, that's
they
not
might.
the issue.
No, but the only thing I can do to make myself feel better in that instance is to take control of me. So then it becomes super important. The question is not, is anything going to change, but what can I do to make a change so that I don't feel so bad?
And I think that
that's the only thing I have control over.
And I think that that's the real challenge for many people in the States right now.
It probably is. And I mean, that's also, I mean, and I there's no quick answer to that question, right? And that's often why people come to see me, because they're like, I want to make this, like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. And then they quite often feel like victims because things are happening to them that they have no control over. And that's when the primitive brain will take control. When something is happening to us, that's a threat coming towards us that we have no control over. We feel powerless. And that's when the primitive brain steps in to take control, which is why we feel stressed. So in that moment, it's then super important to go, okay, what is within my control that I can change? And I probably don't want to change my values. I can't change the government. You know, what can I change? And sometimes there's nothing. So then it becomes down to, well, how do I learn to accept that there's nothing I can do right now, right? But it really depends on the person. So I've potentially not answered your question, but I can't answer that question specifically. But in general, it always comes down to, what do you want to change? What can you change that is within your control? And the only two things are your thoughts and your actions. So you can either change your reaction to something, you can either change what you do about something, or you change, you know, your mindset toward your perception of something. Okay, from anxiety to acceptance, for example. Just go, well, there's nothing I can do. Like, why am I getting so wound up? Because there's literally nothing I can do. But it would depend on the individual. And I would work with that individual in terms of, okay, well, what, like, if, you know, in terms of your levels of happiness right now. So here's a question you could ask, right? In terms of your levels of happiness right now, if you had to rate yourself from 1 to 10, low to high, in terms of your general happiness and well-being, where 1 is, it couldn't get worse if it's tried, and 10 is, life is like so great, I can't believe how great my life is. Where, and don't answer this, by the way, this is not a question, this is just me saying this would be a question. Where would you rate yourself, right? And I will quite often ask people to rate themselves on that scale. And let's say their answer is a 2 out of 10, then I'd be okay. So if by this time next week, I was able to help you feel like a 3 out of 10, what would have changed that you could control? Like what would make you a 3 out of 10? Because to get to a 10 out of 10 from a 2 is like, that's hard and impossible to see. But most often we do kind of go, well, actually, what would make me feel a little bit better is if blah, blah, blah. Okay, so if that's what you want to change, what are some of the things that we need to put into place to make that happen? What do you have control over in that process? And we start to move forward that way. But generally, when people are in the state that you're talking about, which is kind of a either anger or freeze generally, okay, but more often a freeze state, with that comes either anger or depression, that feeling that things are happening to us. That unfortunately is not a quick recovery curve. It tends to be quite a slow, straight line, and then all of a sudden a sharp up, almost like a log curve. But it can be a very slow process, like a baby walking almost. Like you have to get the baby to walk, and then it falls over a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then over a bit, until eventually it kind of gets it, and then all of a sudden it's running, right? It's kind of like that with what you're talking about. Small changes incrementally become a big thing, but you don't always notice the small changes. But that's what we'd have to work on, is the small changes. But a lot of it is that the internal narrative that needs to change, because that's one of the only things you have control over in this instance. That was a very long answer that didn't actually answer your question, Aaron. I'm really sorry, but does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Well, we are at 2:02. We are deeply grateful for your time. Everyone who's here today, thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear it was really helpful. And Marcelle, it was amazing. We'll be in touch to be able to get all the things out to people. I know people will be catching that recording and hitting you up on at your new website whenever it's ready, all of the things.
Great. I'm glad that I was here, because you guys have been so great in interaction. So I thank you, because it's so much nicer when there's interaction and I'm not just talking to people.
I think you need to come to the US. I think maybe you need to come to Massachusetts. Maybe that would.
I would love to come to Massachusetts. I just need to get me that passport.
Yep.
Yeah, so for those of you that are on, but anyway, but yeah, you're welcome. Good. Okay, so we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks.
And thank you all for being here. What a great group.